Hi, and welcome back. Last year, 1 year ago, I quit my job to pursue a life of full-time travel and adventure. Today, I wanted to share with you a little bit about some of the pros and cons I've experienced in early retirement, and some of them may surprise you. I'll also talk about my feelings about retirement so far, a few tips I've learned to make things go more smoothly, and a little bit about my plans for the next year. First, I'll give you a little bit of background of what I've done over the last year, and then I'll talk a little bit about a few of the financial things I've learned, and then I'll go over some of the non-financial pros and cons. If you're new here, my name is Kyria, and I've traveled to almost 60 countries over the last 25 years. And like I said, last year, I retired early to travel the world full time. I love talking about travel, finances, and retirement, but I also want to hear from you. So tell me in the comments, what's your story? Are you retired, or are you thinking about retiring? And if you are, what fears do you have? And if you are already retired, what tips and tricks do you have for somebody who's thinking about retiring soon? Before I start, I want to give a quick shout out to Manny, who bought me an ice cream. Thank you, Manny. I can't wait to go to the Philippines and enjoy it. Now let's get started. So on March 15th of 2024, I had my last day of work, and the next day I took one more Goodwill run, and the day after that I moved out of my house for good. I had spent months getting rid of everything, and it was a bit of a whirlwind, but I do have a video coming out next week about kind of that process and everything, which I'll link here once it's completed. However, I was so glad to have both the job and the decluttering behind me. I still had to sell my house, but luckily I had a realtor who was excellent, and we met up, and I said, look, I want to move out on this day. I can leave it empty for you. And he basically did a lot of the work as far as getting it painted and getting it staged and getting the front yard, fixed up and everything like that. And so essentially, once I moved out, I didn't really look back, which was nice. The weeks leading up to that point had been hectic. Trying to make sure I was ready to leave while still working was kind of a lot to do all at the same time. And when I walked out of my empty house that last day, I heaved a huge sigh of relief. I still had a few loose ends to tie up before leaving, like selling my car and finishing my taxes, but essentially I was pretty much ready to go. 1 week later, I set off on my bike from California to ride across the US and Canada. So that was a new adventure, something I'd never tried before. And it was very freeing, just having the only thing you had to do each day was to ride and find food and find lodging and then do it all again the next day. And I actually think that as a newly retired person, this was perfect for me. It was nice to have a task with a beginning and an end that you could do instead of kind of feeling at loose ends. I think if I wouldn't have had that on my plate, I would have had days where I felt at loose ends. Not only that, but I got to have a new adventure with new challenges, and I was learning new things. So I was still kind of stimulated in multiple different ways right from the get-go. I also met a lot of new people and met up with a lot of different people that I knew along the way. And so this was really a fun adventure, and I had no sense of being bored at all at the beginning. After I got to Nova Scotia and finished the bike trip, I flew back to Seattle, where I did some house sitting for a couple of months. This was a great kind of ease into the slow travel lifestyle, which I knew that I was going to be having more of in the future. It was nice to have a pet to hang out with and kind of keep me going outside at least a couple times a day and getting into a routine and things like that. So kind of easing into some of the daily life of a slow traveler, while also being in a place that I'm a little bit familiar with and also speak the language and all those other things. After that, I went home for the holidays, and then I flew to Europe, where I started doing slow traveling in Europe instead. I spent 1 month in France and 1 month in Spain, and I did a couple other little faster travel stints in between those. I think this was a good mix of fast and slow, because it is nice to stay in a place for a month, kind of get used to it, know where everything is, get your routine going, but it's also kind of exciting to be in a place for only a few days at a time. So I think that was the perfect mix for the beginning. Okay, so let's talk about finances. Obviously, if you're watching this because you're thinking about retiring, you'll know that one of the big things that people that are about to retire or thinking about retiring think about is finances. Do I have enough money? How much money will I spend? What if I get sick? What if something happens? There are so many unknowns, and finances is kind of something that we can control a little bit. I think we focus very much on the financial aspect of retirement. Obviously, if you retire early, you have a lot of years before you can dip into your retirement accounts, so you have to have a cushion. So am I worried? And the short answer to that is no. I think that the important thing is putting in the legwork ahead of time. So I'm a runner, so I'm going to do a running analogy, but one of the things we always say when you're about to run a race is to trust in your training. And I think the same thing goes for retirement. So if you're running a race, you obviously will train for weeks or months sometimes, and the race may last only a couple of hours or less than that at times, but you often are very worried on race day that something's going to go wrong, you're not going to run fast enough, whatever the worries are that you have in your head. But really, you've put in so many months or weeks or hours of training, and you had a schedule and you followed it and you did what you were supposed to do. So the worries a lot of times are unfounded. And I think the same thing goes for your finances. I think you need to put in the work ahead of time, and then you should have everything in place so that if something happens, you'll be ready for it. So for instance, the last few weeks in the stock market haven't been that great. Of course, people are posting things about recession and all those other things that people like to do. But if you look historically back at the stock markets over the last 50, 60, 70 years, they've gone up as an average. And so if you know that you have 10 more years before you can start pulling from your retirement, before you retire early, this should be something you have in place that you know that the next 10 years you're going to have enough to be able to pull out. And so that's something that you should put in place ahead of time. What you need for this is to figure out how much are you spending now and how much are you going to be spending after retirement. And of course, these numbers aren't always perfect. You can only put in, they say garbage in, garbage out. The information you get out of it is only as good as the information that you put into it. So you need to have the information that you put in as good as you can. But of course, you're never going to know what the inflation numbers are going to be or things like that are unknowns, right? You never are going to know what the stock market is actually going to return. But you can only do the best you can, and then have a cash buffer and make sure that you are ready to use the cash buffer, or have dividends coming in and make sure that you can live off of your dividends so that you have a backup plan in case something happens. So that's a long-winded answer, but the answer to the question of am I worried is no. I have everything in place that I need to. And actually, if you watch any of the videos that I've put out about how much I'm spending per month, it's not that much. So as I've talked about before, my budget is about $2,500 per month. So that would be $30,000 a year. So if I continue to stay within my budget, then whether or not the stock market goes up or down, I will be okay. So I'm not really worried about that aspect of it. Obviously, last year was a good one in the markets, and so it's easy to be short-sighted and look back at the one last year and say like, oh, everything's great, everything's fine. But I've also weathered some of the other downturns, and I've come out okay. And obviously in 2008, things went down a lot, and we all watched our money be halved, but it eventually came back, and that will happen again. And so I think that I'm not too worried about it. There's a couple things that did take a little bit of getting used to in the last year. And the first one is that I don't have a regular paycheck coming in. So I always had it organized where my paycheck came in on the 1st and I had all my bills paid on the 4th. And then the second paycheck, because I got paid twice a month, I could use it to put in savings or whatever the thing was that I was doing secondarily. And sometimes that was investing, for instance. And now I don't have the money coming in, so I've had to change my strategy a little bit. I still do kind of the same thing as far as I still pay my bills all on the 4th, and instead of the money coming from my paycheck, I transfer it from my high yield savings account. So that way I can keep the money in the high yield savings account until the very last minute. So I transfer it on the 1st, I pay my bills on the 4th. So it is only now once a month, which is actually kind of easier, but I don't have that little extra coming in the middle of the month that I can now invest. So that's the second point I was going to say is it is a little weird because I was kind of used to regularly investing. So if the markets went down, I would always think, oh, that's fine. I'm just going to be buying things at a lower price. Well, now I don't really have that anymore. So I'm not regularly investing necessarily. Of course, with dividends, if I don't use my dividends for my living expenses, then I would reinvest those into the market. So I'm still getting that a little bit, but it's not as much as it was before. So that's taken a little bit of getting used to as well. Let's talk about the other part of retiring early. I don't know if you listen to the podcast Choose FI, but I do listen to that quite a bit. And it's a lot about finances, right? So you talk about your finances. Do you have enough finances? Are you going to have enough for the 4% rule or the withdrawal rate or the drawdown rate or the whatever the things are that they're talking about? There's all these rules of thumb and things with numbers, right? And I think that, like I said before, that makes us more comfortable because it's something we can kind of control. Whereas the thing we don't really talk about as much is the emotional side of it. So first I'll tell you a few pros from the last year. The first pro is that my time is my own. If I want to get up late, if I want to ride my bike all day, if I want to read my book all day, if I want to do whatever I want to do, it's my choice. So that's kind of a nice thing. I mean, we're very used to having someone tell us, well, you have to be from 8 to 5 or from 9 to 5 or whatever at this one place, and then you can work all your other stuff around that. It's really kind of nice to have every minute be my own. The second pro is I love being able to do things when it's not as busy. Whether this means going grocery shopping on a Tuesday morning or traveling on the off season or being able to go to touristy things when it's not totally swamped, all of that is a real plus for me. I don't really like crowds, but I still want to see some of the things that, like traveling, I still want to see some of the things that everyone else wants to see, but it's so nice to have the choice to be able to do it when I want to do it and not when all the kids are out of school. So that is like a huge plus. The next one is I love being able to say, I'll come back to that later. It is so nice to be in a city and not have to feel like, oh my gosh, I only have 2 days here and I have to check off all the boxes of all the touristy things that everybody says that I have to do. No, I can just go and spend all day in the Louvre if I only have 1 day in Paris. And you know what? I can come back to Paris later on if I want to see other stuff. Or even better, I love the fact that I've been able to go back to some places. So Paris is a great example. I've been there probably 4 times now. And the last time I went, I just went for daily runs and wandered around the streets and ate croissants. And I didn't have to worry about, oh, I need to go see the Eiffel Tower or do this or that. It was so nice to just be able to relax into the city and not be a on the move tourist all the time. So that's been a great pro. The next one is I love learning new things every day, and I am learning new things every day. Whether it's the history of a place or something about the culture or the people or a new language, or if it's just something silly like learning how to make these videos and learning how to edit them and put a circle around my face or blur something or make an arrow or whatever, like things like that. I'm still learning and I like that feeling, but it is coming at a different pace than it may have come when you're in school and you're forced to learn something. And I'm also retaining a lot more of it. So if I don't have to do it, if I'm not being pressured to do it, then I want to do it, then it's a whole different story. I mean, it's really great. The next one is that I love Mondays. This kind of goes back to the grocery shopping on a Tuesday or whatever. Most people dread Mondays, and I love Mondays. In fact, when I was riding my bike, I actually disliked Saturday and Sunday because when you're riding, especially on the road or even on a trail or a path or whatever, there's a lot more people. And so it would be a lot more crowded and I have to be going around people and I'd have to worry about hitting people or a car hitting me or this or that. So for me, when Monday came, it was actually a better day because it was less people. So I really like Mondays. The next pro is that I can pursue anything I want without having to worry about whether or not it's going to make me any money. When I was younger, I always said, if money was no object, if I won the lottery, I would go and be a Lonely Planet travel photographer and writer. And now, luckily, I can pursue things like that. And if they don't pan out, it doesn't really matter. I can get the enjoyment out of it and I don't have to worry about relying on it for an income. The next pro is that I've had time to spend a lot of time with friends. When I was riding across the country, I actually stopped and stayed with people along the way. I also met people along the way and sometimes would go and stay with them later on. Or people came to meet up with me along the way. So it's nice to have the open schedule that I can just stop by when it's convenient for someone else and not have to try to cram it all into a couple of days here and there when I'm off. Also, I have the freedom to say yes if someone says, do you want to come visit? And I can say yes, because I can. Whereas before it was like, oh, well, I only have this many days off and I have to cram it into this little 3-day weekend, which everybody else is also flying on and things like that. And so it's nice to have the freedom to say yes without the constraints of a schedule. The next pro, and this is a little different because if you did not downsize or are not full-time traveling, then you may not have this. But because I got rid of everything and am basically now carrying my belongings on my back, I don't really have anything. And it's very freeing to not have anything. I don't have to worry about what to wear. I basically have it all in my bag with me. Those are my only choices. I don't have to think about buying anything. I don't really have any room in my bag for it. So it really takes a lot of decision-making process away, which is a good thing. As always, there are always some cons along with every pro. And I want to be realistic because if you're watching this because you're thinking about retiring, I just want you to know that it is great, definitely, but there are some cons, of course. So let me go over a few of those. The first one, and I think this will get better with time, but I'm still learning to manage my time. I do sometimes still feel unproductive, or like if I'm not doing something that makes money, then it's not productive. And I'm learning to get used to that, but I also am trying to learn how to redefine my day. Like I said, I think having the bike trip at the beginning was good because it gave me kind of a daily goal or weekly goal or monthly goal or whatever. But now that I'm doing more slow traveling, I am still kind of learning how to make those goals without over planning for myself, because I am a planner. So there's kind of a conflict there. The second one, and I know I said that this was a pro before, but it is also a con, and that is learning new things. Learning new things is fun, definitely, but it can also sometimes be hard. When was the last time you had to start at the beginning of something and learn everything? How to do it, who the contacts are, how to make new connections, how to get from point A to point B, and you knew nothing about it. Well, it was hard, right? Basically, full-time traveling often is that every single day. Every day there's a new language, a new city, and not necessarily because if you're slow traveling, obviously it's a little bit different, but there is always that sense of not knowing and having to learn in every new place that you go. The other thing you have to learn is how to make new friends, and making new friends is already hard when you're an adult, but when you're moving around a lot, it's even harder. So you have to figure out where are the locations or the methods that you can make friends, and how does that work? And just all that stuff is a lot of new things every single day, which can sometimes get tiring. The next one is that decision fatigue is a real thing. I definitely had this when riding my bike because every day I was in a new place, had to go to a new place, had to figure out the route, had to figure out what to eat, where was I staying, how was I going to get there, all that stuff just every single day, and it got very tiring. With slow travel, it's not quite as extreme, but you still do land in a new place, have to figure out the bus system or the train system or the local culture, or whether or not the grocery stores are open on Sundays and where is the grocery store. Just little things like that can be a lot of decisions to make day after day sometimes, and it gets a little tiring. Another con, and this obviously won't be a con for everybody who's retired or retired early, but I miss my bike now that I'm slow traveling. And I know that sounds like kind of a funny thing, but before I quit working, I was commuting to work on my bike. And then after I quit working, I was riding my bike pretty much every day. And I did like the freedom of being able to see an area quickly on a bike. And I've looked into renting a bike in some of the places that I've stayed in since then, but it's quite expensive. I mean, you can get like a city bike, which has a not comfortable seat and usually a pretty janky pedals and everything like that. But to get like a good bike, a regular road bike or mountain bike, it's pretty expensive. So I'm still looking to see if there's something like, the app Turo for cars. I wonder if there's something like that for bikes where you could just borrow or rent somebody's bike when you're in a place temporarily. Whew. I don't know if you can hear that, but that's rain. It's raining very, very hard right now. But I haven't found an app like that. So if you know an app like that where I could borrow or rent someone's bike for like a week or two, a nice bike and a helmet and a lock and all that stuff, I want all the stuff. I do wish that I had a way to be able to go out and ride a couple times a week or something like that. That would be nice. The next one, and I kind of touched on this a little bit briefly before, but you have to make new connections in every place. Pretty much everybody from before in my real life, I do keep in touch with them, but they don't really understand me. They don't understand the full-time travel lifestyle. They don't understand the early retired lifestyle. So they're loving and they're caring and everything, but they don't really get it. And so finding like-minded people is a little difficult. And then also having to find them over and over again every month is difficult. And also I am an introvert. I don't really love small talk. I would rather just know people and feel connected to them right from the beginning. So having to move to a new place, make small talk all over, meet people and all that stuff can be a little hard sometimes. The next one is that I miss the regular life things. Like I was going to my friends' kids' soccer games every weekend, or I was going out for my weekly group run with my running friends. It's sometimes hard to know that those people are still doing those things and you're not there. On one hand, you're having new and exciting and fulfilling experiences. On the other hand, the pictures that people send you of the weekend fun does make you feel a little nostalgic. Luckily, there are video calls and things, but I do miss seeing people in person sometimes. Especially the kids, they grow so fast. And so every time I go home, my friends' kids are like a head taller. So let's talk about my feelings as a whole and some things that I've done to kind of help combat some of these things. First of all, I know that I'm new to this, and I know that 1 year in maybe is still learning, right? I'm still learning. I'm still getting used to this concept of not having to work. And I'll definitely have to make some tweaks as I go to figure out what the best lifestyle going forward looks like. The good thing is I can change. I can try new things. I can maybe stay in one place even longer, or do another bike trip, or whatever I want to do. The world is my oyster, and so that's the good part of that. But right now, I'm still kind of in the fact-finding stage, and I'm okay with pivoting as I go. I think that for me, it was also important to think about the concept that even if I've done something before, this isn't exactly the same. So I've taken off years or a year at a time before and gone and traveled full-time. But I always had to go back once I run out of money. So hopefully this will be a little different, but I've had to kind of wrap my mind around that it doesn't have an end date. The other thing that I've found helps a lot is to still have a routine. So when I was working, I had to be at the office by the time the markets opened. And so I would go into work at about 5 a.m. So I got up really early. And I don't get up at quite as early as I did before, but I still get up early and I have my little routine with my coffee and my news, and then I go for a run or walk or whatever my exercise is for the day. And then that kind of just sets the tone for the day, even though after that the routine might be a little bit different. But there's still certain things that I like to kind of check off and be consistent with that make me feel like my day is a little bit more structured without being completely scheduled. And of course, again, if for some reason I don't do my run in the morning, I'll just do it in the afternoon. It doesn't really matter. I'm okay with pivoting, but usually I try to have the same routine to a certain extent for certain things. The other thing I've learned has been helpful is to do things in time blocks. Travel planning is a great example. It's really easy to work on it for a little bit and then not really have any conclusion. And then the next day or the next week or whatever it is, you go back and you kind of have to start not from the very beginning, but back a little bit, because you have to kind of research things all over again to a certain extent. So I found it's a lot better for me to say, look, I'm going to sit down today for 4 hours and I'm going to plan the next 1 month ahead for everything like accommodation and transportation, at least, right? That way those are booked in and you can fill it in with activities later that aren't quite as important to book as early, but you have a resolution or a conclusion instead of kind of leaving things open-ended and then going back to them and wasting time so that you don't feel productive. It's very easy to work on that a little bit and then the next day work on that a little bit and then the next day work on it a little bit more and not really get anything done. So I found that if I put it all in a time block and I have a specific goal for that time block, it helps me a lot. The other thing I do is I found it's important to keep connections back home. And again, I have regularly scheduled phone calls and video calls with people, and that helps a lot. Because again, it's easy to have a week go by or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and all of a sudden you haven't talked to a person for a while and you're feeling a little separated from them and they're feeling, separated from you and all that stuff. So it's kind of good to have a couple of regularly scheduled things, and that way you're still keeping connection with people back home. All right, so what's the plan for the next 1 year? Well, I would say that depends. That's always the answer, right? But seriously, it's still a work in progress. I'm still kind of figuring it out. I do think that I will keep on traveling. What exactly that will look like, I don't know. I'll keep doing the slow travel thing for definitely a few more months at least. I know this summer I want to do some hiking. We'll see how the hiking goes, because I think right now it's wintertime, obviously, and I haven't been able to get outside as much as I'd like. But right now I'm missing being active more. So we'll see if the summer cures me of that feeling and what happens after that. But I do plan on traveling. I just don't know exactly how that will look. So now I've gone over my first year of retirement. So leave a note in the comments. Like I said, are you retired already? If so, what tips do you have for somebody who's thinking about retiring? And if you're not retired already, what fears do you have about retiring? If you haven't already seen my interview over at Fire We Go about early retirement, travel, and financial independence, you can watch it here. Also, in my next video, I'll be talking about the process of decluttering everything to travel full time. So if that sounds like something that would interest you, please subscribe so that you don't miss it. And once again, thank you very much for watching and happy travels.